Okay, welcome everyone. It's 5 after. Holy smokes. It's a good thing that I'm not presenting today. I think I will fumble over my words. KubeCon has a way of doing that to you. Who all is attending KubeCon? Remind me, is it free? Or is there a nominal fee to get in? Oh, Homero Marine. Okay, very good. Anybody who sound off if you would in the chat if you're attending KubeCon. If you're not, or there is a fee and it's potentially getting in your way, let me know. Let me know. There's potential ways around that. So let's put KubeCon as a topic. There we go. Okay. Well, it's Friday, the 23rd of October. So next time we meet, it'll be just in advance of Candy Day or Halloween here in the US. In the chat is linked to these meeting minutes. I'm not sure why we still feel compelled to put that in there because everybody that's on the call is doing a fantastic job of doing exactly what you're supposed to do anyway. So do we have any, I think, Homero, this might be your first time on this call. Very nice to have you. I understand that you're audio challenged today, or rather it'll be a one-way audio discussion. So if you don't mind, introduce yourself in the chat to everyone else that's here on the call. It'd be great to get to know you some. And so as Homero is doing that, we'll welcome a number of newcomers this week. We had a workshop given at CCOSS, which I think was this week on Tuesday. It feels like it was this week. So a few people have come in from there. We had a couple people come in from 3 O'Reilly workshops that have been given over the last 2 weeks. And that's been quite pleasant. People are taking advantage of Meshery and putting it to use. Speaking of people putting Meshery to use, there's a long-awaited achievement here, I guess, if you can call this an achievement. The Meshery project that you all have been working on is getting noticed, and it's getting noticed without a lot of marketing, I would say, like comparatively to other projects that just got announced last week. A couple from HashiCorp that are open source. They've got 2,000 or so stars because they have a big stage to announce those on. So it's very easy to collect those stars. So while for my part, I would hope that Meshery would have just as many, a couple thousand. I'll say that I'm really proud of the 500 that are there. They are hard earned and honestly earned. People didn't star Meshery out of buzziness. They starred Meshery because they're intrigued, and hopefully it's helping people. So everyone here should take some pride in that. I can't help but point out that if you browse Meshery's README, you may have noticed toward the bottom, there's a small timeline inserted. Timeline tracking the stars as the project has accumulated them. And I'll comment that this is a nice looking incline. We're doing good. 505. I tell you what, we've tracked that number so tightly from at various times that at any point in time, I could tell you the precise number that was on that, the precise number of stars. So cool. Kudos to everyone here. Okay, I said we would talk about KubeCon for a moment, so we're gonna make it through the announcements and then be into the topics. I think this is probably the last general topic. There were a couple of KubeCon talks recorded specific to this community. I will put the links to those recordings in here in case people want to see them before KubeCon comes out. The Meshery and Service SMI Conformance and Service Mesh Performance, SMP, and the landscape. And I'm trying to think about what else, the adapters and things. Those were all shown in both of the talks. So your work has been recorded. Shown on, it'll be shown on stage at KubeCon. And so I'll be sure to point out the talks so that all of you can beam with pride as that happens. So pretty neat. Okay, before we go into the first topic, now is the time to solicit additional topics. If you have topics to chat about today, just drop them down below. Nikita, I'm pleased that you're here. You've been on the tip of my tongue this last week. There are a few issues that we talked about on Wednesday's Meshery call that relate to one of your first questions about how can you easily only spin up certain adapters. We talked all about that on Wednesday, and I think the community is forming a more robust plan about how to enable people to manage that. So I'll message you separately about some of the concepts there. Good deal. All right. First topic up at bat today is on common libraries.
Yes, thank you, Lee. Let me try and share my screen. It's always a interesting. I think I try this. Do you see the first slide of the presentation, common libraries?
We do.
Good. So maybe start with a little bit of background. I understood that for some time before I joined this lovely community, there was a discussion about common libraries, introducing common libraries to be used in Meshery code. And one of the common libraries was called, or is called, GoKit. And I started working on the console adapter and contributing to the Meshery adapter documentation. And then, of course, there was the discussion about common libraries. Then Abhishek was implementing a common set of packages, if you like, in the Kuma adapter. And I sort of thought it would be a good test to see whether those can be extracted to a common library and reused in the console adapter code. And that's what I've then been doing and working on. So now we have another common library called Meshery Adapter Library, which is used in one branch of the console adapter, which is up as a pull request as well. And of course, we discussed, then started discussing more, how the purpose of common libraries for Meshery, how they should be designed, the advantages and disadvantages. And then Abhishek and I were working together on this presentation, discussing it together. So these are some sort of general considerations about common libraries in general, but also, of course, for Meshery, and they're by no means conclusive. And so I think we go through these slides. I saw that Lee has added some comments. There are a couple of slides, maybe 7, 8 slides, but we can discuss otherwise when you're going through the slides. So obviously, benefits or common libraries have some benefits, and there's also a reason why one likes to introduce common libraries. One of them is, of course, that one would like to avoid code duplication. One would like to implement the plumbing, so the boring bits and pieces, so that users of the library, in our case, for instance, the Meshery adapters developers, can focus on implementing adapter-specific code. I think this is one of the comments that Lee added here, allowing, I can see it, it's hidden behind my here, allowing service meshes to expose their differentiated capabilities. Common libraries can also encourage good practice, introducing and helping uniform and consistent approach to cross-cutting concerns like logging and error handling, for instance, by having a common set of error codes, which make monitoring and analyzing error situations much easier. Then there is also the benefit that if you have a common library, that the users of those library get updated and improved functionality for free. You can also more easily address security concerns and distribute them. And as I said previously, it allows developers to focus on the non-common aspects. So there are some requirements to a library, to any common library actually. It should be well documented, but of course not over documented. It should be easily understandable, it should be easy to use. It should enable productive development. So it should not force developers to use something, but it should enable them to be able more productive. It should be minimal as possible, so that you don't have a lot of maintenance burden in this library. There should be loose coupling between libraries and modules using it. And there should also be sort of like, designed for exchange, designed for extension, be designed for change. Things change over the course of time. And in our case, it will also be good, as I mentioned before, that they implement like common messaging system for communicating errors and logs and events. But of course, there are also things that we need to watch out for with common libraries, with any library for that matter. Others can become dependent on common libraries. And so there is a danger or a possibility that common libraries become a bottleneck for necessary changes, like for instance, adding new error codes or updating a library version or something like that. It's tempting to try to predict all possible use cases, and we know, that's almost impossible. And generalization in general is not easy. So one has to be quite certain that this is beneficial if one tries to generalize something. And I think it also requires more, even more thorough testing than one should do in the modules, because a lot of other projects and modules and people are depending on it. Something we also started discussing is sort of, should we have a top-down or bottom-up approach? Meaning, should new functionality first be implemented in the common library and then distribute it, or should it be possible to implement it in, say, an adapter library or another module that is using common library, and then sort of refactored up to the common library? And I think it's both. I think the need often surfaces in the modules, And it might be a good idea just to implement it in the module and then see whether it can be generalized sort of from the bottom up. But at the same time, that we also have sort of like guidelines and design best practice or good practice from the top, so that we have a plan when we sort of develop a common library and the usages of it. So one comment by Lee is the issues with centrally defined protos. And yes, this is sort of, the dependency on common libraries. But as far as I can see, we already have that now, because they live in Meshery code, if I remember correctly, and then you always get it from there if you implement functionality. But then, of course, and I guess in our use case, it has to be synchronized anyway. But this is something we have to look into as well. Another couple of questions we discussed, like, should modules that are using common libraries, like the Meshery adapters, should they be allowed to import libraries like the Kubernetes client Go, or any other library that is used by the common library as well, to implement missing functionality? And I think that should be allowed, because if it wouldn't be allowed, I mean, one thing is to sort of disallow it if one has a good reason, and another thing is to, how would you enforce that anyway? And I think it just is natural that it's possible to extend and use these libraries also in the modules. Well, one thing one sort of can try to do is that one thinks about this might actually become common functionality, and design it in a way by packaging appropriately and avoiding dependencies from the adapter specific code into the possibly common code when one implements it in a more specific module like an adapter. And also one thing we discussed is that by using common libraries, version of third-party libraries like the Kubernetes client Go library will probably be or will be defined by the common library, so that this is uniform across all modules using common library. I'm not quite sure actually whether it is how Go handles if one uses different versions of the same libraries, if there is no sort of API conflict. But I think in general, I think it would be quite difficult to avoid getting conflicts, as we often experience. Now I can, so when we talked about, I thought a little bit about, can we sort of like differentiate different types of common libraries? Because I think the ones we have, the two ones we talk about now, the GoKit library and the Meshery adapter library, they are slightly different. So one way to look at it is that one of the libraries is like a framework, a mini framework. So it is used by implementing use case specific code to be called by the framework. And the Meshery adapter library, this is, so the Meshery adapter library does all the plumbing around the gRPC API and code. So the protos live in this case, as it is now, in the Meshery adapter library. And almost the only thing you have to do in the adapter code is to implement the function which is called apply operation, which is then called by this mini framework implemented in the Meshery adapter library. And apply operation, of course, is the adapter specific code, how to install the different meshes and configure the meshes and so on. And then on the other hand, you might have a library that is more towards tooling, if you like, utilities and tools that is imported and used directly. And in that sense, maybe GoKit is more such a tooling library. When I was sort of started being involved in this in Meshery, I was really quite confused about the some of the names that were used, and Meshkit showed up several times when people were talking about GoKit, as I found out, and so it was discussed to rename GoKit to Meshkit. Also makes it a little bit easier not to confuse it with GoKit Kit, which is the GoKit with a hyphen between the Go and the Kit, which is this middleware library that we're also using. And I think that's now that we now will, if I understood some comment I saw, I think in a issue correctly, that we're now actually ready to rename GoKit to Meshkit at some stage. Here is sort of like a diagram exemplifying a little bit what we've been talking about as well, Abhishek and me. So there's this function now in the Meshery adapter library that is getting service ports of a Kubernetes service. And then we sort of discussed where should this live? Should this be in the Meshery adapter library, or should it be moved up to the Meshkit library? And if then this service is, this function, is moved up to the Meshkit library, then also our Kubernetes client code also needs to be moved up to the Meshkit library. And these are sort of like discussions we have to take and when we're designing, and we also have to document this so that it's easily understandable where the code has to go and where it is coming from. And here is also illustrated and whether, for instance, Helm code or GoKit Kit code should also be allowed to use directly in specific, say, adapter libraries or some of the other modules that we're using. I think also something that can be useful is to have a sort of like a model, a hierarchical model, to make clear which libraries are sort of like at the top and have no dependencies to other of our own libraries. So typically, for instance, a config library or package would be the root, if you like, of a dependency hierarchy, and could be imported by any other module or library. And on the other hand, you would not want to import code from the Meshery console adapter in the Meshery adapter library. And to avoid circular dependencies and then problems associated with that. And this is this happens quite easily. That one creates circular dependencies without noticing it. So this is sort of like what we had prepared, and the purpose, of course, is to have a discussion about this. How should we design it? Where should we document it? For instance, should we use more Godoc? How detailed should we document it? Is this a good idea? Should we start with the first version now? Like the first version is already there. We version it as a beta version. It's used in a Meshery console adapter as a PR. I personally think we can't get it right the first time anyway, and having a continuous improvement and refactoring in a careful way, of course, as it is a common library, and maybe start with sort of like 2 adapters using it in the first round, a console adapter and a Kuma adapter, for instance, would be a good way to go forward, and then discover issues and advantages and disadvantages with this approach. So this is about what I had to say. Are there any questions or comments?
Well, I feel compelled to call some people off the bench. And yeah, so Nikita, great question. The essence of Nikita's comment is it more complex than it needs to be? Or is it possible to simplify? And so, Michael, I guess, yeah, that is the question. Is like, is there any amount of simplification that could be done?
What kind of simplification? I think I think this is quite simple. It's only 3 layers, but what kind of, where do you see the complexity? Maybe this.
Yeah, it's good. Only point which I was thinking is like one library is importing the another layer. Like, so.
I mean, maybe it suggests that you have to go through all the layers, but that's not what I'm trying to show here. It's just trying to show that um, that, for instance, Meshkit should not import the Meshery adapter library. But as we have discussed now, probably sort of at the top level import, the Kubernetes client Go would go one level up, if you like. But this is sort of more a, it's not meant to introduce complexity. It's just meant to introduce a mental model of the hierarchy so that one avoids creating more complex dependencies, and especially that one avoids circular dependencies. And no, it's more, a help to where does the code go? But the aim, of course, has to be whatever we do, it has to make life simpler for people using the libraries and more easily understandable where the code comes from and where you want to put it if you add new functionality. I don't know where it is. Thank you. But the Meshery adapter document, I think I stopped sharing my screen, is open for any comments and discussions, and please just feel free to add your comments there.
Mihu, this is good. This is good. There's some things to talk about inside of here. So first, I know that for some of you for whom this is your first call, this hopefully this is intriguing and a good level of depth to tickle your noodle, if I can get you excited, So here's the link to the presentation that Michu was just presenting. There's a related, there's another topic on a messaging system that's kind of related to some of the same design principles and some of the same value that we will derive as a project through use of a couple of common libraries. Today probably isn't the day to talk about that messaging system, but Dev, I called you out in specific as you're looking at NATs for architecture related to, well, for Meshery architecture, but sort of related to Mesh Sync. It also strikes me that as we have distributed components, any number of adapters and Meshery server, it may or may not be appropriate to use NATs there as well. One of the things I think Michu is characterizing is that the adapters, and I'm going to pull up a visualization of the adapters. Today, they will, people can see this in full screen mode, correct? Like, because Zoom occasionally does a thing where you go full screen and then you, okay. There's a number of things to talk about. So one of them is that when we first started writing Meshery, we were in a big hurry, like we typically are. We did try to give some forethought and some learnings from of those that were involved at the time. We tried to make sure that lessons learned in other projects were incorporated here. So one of those was around, one of those valuable learnings was the fact that having a framework that accounts for, that is adaptable, that is extensible in this way, is highly appropriate. And over the last couple of year and a half now of the project being going on, it's proven to be very true. If you know, there's 20 something service meshes now, and so had we, you know, had the project had the design that all the support for each of those individual service meshes and interacting with them in different ways, because they all have different APIs. They all want to be provisioned using different mechanics, whether that's manifests or Helm charts or using their CLI itself or other. That would have been that would have made the project fragile. Building out adapters makes it extensible. It means that one adapter can fall behind in terms of keeping pace, and that's all right. Meshery itself and its core functionality still works. People can come in and descend upon something like the console adapter and reach, you know, pull it up from the depths of like being a year old to being quite up to speed. And that can happen independent of each other. So this is one of, when you step back and look at this is Meshery itself, and its architecture is microservices oriented in nature. There's not a ton of services, but there's enough here that you start to have distributed systems concerns. And you also start to benefit from a microservices architectural approach, which, by the way, you know, I will tell you, you can believe me or not, but that much of the reason that people go to microservices in the first place is all about organizational things, all about speed and enabling people to choose best fit technologies and allowing those teams to create contracts with other teams and move forward independently and rapidly. It's the same, a similar value proposition that service meshes have. If that doesn't immediately resonate for you, it may not. Come see me. I'll tell you why that is. How a service mesh and its value relates to the same concept of separating concerns. So on the adapters themselves, well, I'm re-articulating some things that Michael said, because in part, like anytime that I see people not asking some questions or making some suggestions, I consider it's kind of one of two things. It's either I don't understand what you just said, so like I don't really have anything to add there, or two, it's yeah, I get it, and this is kind of boring, or like let's go to the next thing. My hunch is there's more of us that land in that first bucket of I kind of get what's going on. There's some refactoring to improve the project. There's some value in doing that. But the merits of one direction versus the next, okay. I'll tell you now that what we had done, if you go into the Layer5 IO org, the set of repositories that Meshery and the other projects here are built on. There's 43 repos now, which is kind of amazing to me. But one of those, I believe, carries the name Meshery adapter template, which only speaks to the pain involved in not applying the principle of dry, like Michu was saying, dry being do not repeat yourself. What we ended up doing was, well, we created the Istio adapter first, and we needed to make the other adapters. They need most of the same code. There's some smaller nuanced differences between the individual meshes. They're all generally, they're all in the same category of technology. They're all a service mesh. They're going after some common use cases, and they're different too. Really what we're trying to do here is stop repeating ourselves, stop copying and pasting code that we've got to go over and fix, 9 times over now, because we're about to have a 9th adapter for the Nginx service mesh. And instead, work on toward that dry principle and trying to achieve basically, essentially almost no repetitive code within each Meshery adapter. And another way of articulating that is to say that each adapter should really only contain service mesh specific logic. So if you're dealing with the Istio adapter, the logic that's in there should really be specific to Istio constructs, Galley and Pilot and Citadel and other Istio specific things that you won't find elsewhere. That's part of the goal that Michu is talking about. There's another important reason why we'll continue to have adapters as separate constructs. One of those reasons, is to avoid what happens inside of specifications, very frequently happens inside of specifications. This specification, service mesh interface, is a precise example of what I mean by a specification leveling the playing field for any participating project or participating technology. So SMI itself is a set of 4 APIs. It defines service mesh functionality like if you want to use a service mesh to split traffic requests, you can. That's a fairly universally supported capability across any of the service meshes. So SMI defines a common API to configure traffic splitting. And any of the 7 service meshes that implement SMI, as someone consuming a mesh and using it and wanting to do intelligent things with it, you can either make a choice to write your software and write your infrastructure specific to that mesh or not, or use this abstract layer. The challenge with any abstract layer is that of actually what Michu was talking about generalization. Like it's hard for a spec like SMI to generally present a uniform API surface, and at the same time expose all the unique differentiation that Istio or Mesh or Linkerd might have, and keep a uniform interface. Like it doesn't, by the way. It does a lowest common denominator set of capabilities. So in fact, right now, SMI is only so powerful, or you can only get so much out of a mesh if you're using SMI only. That is in contrast to what we're trying to achieve here. We're intentionally allowing service meshes to a venue or a vehicle to expose their differentiation, their unique capabilities, by putting that service mesh specific logic into the designated adapter. That doesn't mean that we have to go around repeating ourselves a ton. And so because we have distributed systems concerns here, and because there's a couple of languages that we focus on in this particular project, pertinent to this conversation is Golang is what these adapters in Meshery are written in. Well, as a predecessor to service meshes were client libraries or microservices frameworks. One of the more popular ones in Goland is GoKit, what Michael was talking about. And today, we don't require that Meshery runs on a service mesh. Maybe we should. Or maybe we shouldn't require it, but we should take advantage of it if a mesh is present. We should be eating our own dog food a bit in this regard. And so knowing that we do have distributed systems concerns, but we're not taking advantage of a service mesh, or not requiring a service mesh to be present, we are embedding GoKit we're importing it as a library into the projects. Turns out that GoKit has a lot of what we need, but it also only takes it so far. There's some customizations that we want to do, particularly around the first example that comes to my mind is around error messaging and logging, and making sure that when things go awry, that we're really giving people a great experience, telling them what specific error occurred. Here's the unique identifier for it. Here's the probable cause, and here's suggested remediations. And we need a system wherein we can do that. The error logging system, the logging system inside of GoKit, by the way, is referenced on the Layer5 IO landscape. Because like I was saying, client libraries are something of a predecessor to service meshes. So here, GoKit, client libraries, GoKit. There's a link to it, so it's kind of why I'm bringing it up, so you can go look at some of the functions that it provides. So what some of the maintainers here have done is worked with this architecture. They've taken and forked GoKit and are beginning to add a little bit of special sauce on top of that. They're called, so Michu, clarify and remind me, if you would, the language, the naming system that we're using here, the fork of GoKit that we have, we're renaming that to Meshkit, which will be a general purpose library for any adapters or for Meshery server or for other Golang components that we may have within the project. Subsequent to that will be a common adapter library, a Meshery adapter library that will leverage some of these, that error messaging system and things that are described here, but that adapter library will build on that by adding in support for provisioning a service mesh using Helm, or downloading a service mesh's release packages from GitHub, or any number of these common use cases that we find we have need for across the adapters. The adapters will in turn import that package and leverage the package. So there's a little bit of a need for this third layer here, this top layer, because not everything that's going to use these libraries and use that error messaging system and other, they're not all going to be adapters. Okay, so I just reset everything that Michu said, and I don't know why I felt compelled to do that. Rather, I've got a couple of questions, or I do know why I felt compelled to do it, because if you're not speaking up, then you're going to have to listen to me re-explain something, I guess. Here's a question from me, to everyone: is this allowed, or would we just require that sort of Meshkit is sort of the top level, the topmost library that you can import from? Is there a scenario in which think on that. Abhishek, you got any ideas? I'm picking on you because Michael had to talk for 20 minutes.
So are you asking if this has to be allowed or not?
Yeah, I guess here, let me posit this. I think that should be disallowed. I think that line shouldn't be there. Or I'll make that statement, you know, like, hey, what do you think?
So if that is not there, then the adapter code will be restricted to not use a couple of utility functions that are inside Meshkit, like the generate UID functions and like a general utility functions like unmarshal, marshal, or whatever. Uh, Another example would be to do a TCP check on a service endpoint or something.
Okay, let me make sure. Let me repeat that back. So taking that example of like a UUID generator, you're saying that's been it's a common utility that we have added into Meshkit. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Nice. And so if an adapter wanted to take advantage of the ability to generate a UUID, it would import the Meshery adapter library because it has other adapter needs. Included in there is access to UUID.
Yeah, totally. So basically, UID was just an example. So something that is, so for example, I have a functionality A in Meshkit, which I just do a wrap on the adapter library for the adapters to use. Then that will be just an overkill. Like basically, I might as well directly use the functionality A in the adapter instead of having a wrapper function inside the adapter library.
Okay. Are you looking at the diagram on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think I got what you're saying. I am unconvinced. What is the? Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
I think, why shouldn't it be allowed to import? I think there are several questions and also possible answers. I think one will be a technical. So if we implement the same functionality, say with this UUID generation, should we use that, or should we be allowed to use another one? But also, I think another discussion or reason is, if I haven't really had a close look at the GoKit library, if it's implementing middleware, should it actually be from a architectural point of view, be allowed to implement or use middleware functionality in the adapters, or should this be part of the Meshery adapter library? And there might well be, use case where present functionality in the Meshkit or Meshery adapter library is not do not cover that. So, and if I had a quick check, but I don't think Meshkit is actually forking GoKit.
Yeah, hopefully not. Hopefully it's directly importing. So hopefully Meshkit is all of what GoKit is, but it might be overwriting some interfaces, or it might be adding some new utilities.
But I'm a bit confused because I don't think Meshkit is all that GoKit is. But Abhish, please correct me, because that's something from the discussions I read in the document and on Slack. It confused me a bit.
Abhishek, do you want to speak to that?
I didn't quite get that. Can you repeat?
Yeah, you know what? Well, maybe I'll suggest this just because there's 5 minutes left, that this was, it might maybe suffice to say, this is wonderful. This is exactly the type of discussion and presentation of concerns and considerations that we needed, Michael. it'll get people thinking on the subject, and it's good to give everyone on the call a bit of time to digest and comment. So I'll go re-articulate that same question. Well, you know, but good. We had a number of other topics to go through. Are anyone that's representing these topics, any of these that you want to speak to in the time that we have left?
I am here if you want to say something about the costs.
That'd be great. Yeah, please.
Okay, perfect. This week we keep a workshop on Meshery. The workshop was based on the topics was first Lewis giving an overview what a service mesh is and what Meshery is and how Meshery is used to as a tool for evaluate service mesh. And the second part was given by me and how to people contribute to Meshery documentation translation project. Because was an event focused on Latin American people, so lot of people is speaking in Spanish. So the objective of course was to help people to start contributing to any project. So we think that doing a translation is a good entry point to start contributing for anyone that is not native English speaker. So that was the overview. And the event workshop, there is the record of how to do the contributions to the translation of Meshery. And I think that this is a good effort for the rest of the people that is not from a country that speaks English, to give representation of the diversity of people in Meshery and around Layer5 projects. The first step that we are working on is only to translate their Markdown files. Yes, and we received a couple of pull requests. Some of those are already merged. During this weekend, the course event continues working on something called a sprint contribution that we consist of 2 days, Friday and Saturday, sorry, from assistants working on doing contributions. So probably during this weekend we are going to receive more pull requests on translation. I can assist people to finish that process. And during this weekend or during the next week, I think I going to discuss with Shriti about how we can implement about a more robust way to allow documentation to be translated into another language. There is a plugin in Jekyll that we can use, and we need to discuss for the next week, for example, how that plugin will change the architecture over Meshery documentation, and maybe the idea is that in a couple of months or some time ago we can translate the whole size we have available. So that is like the refresh of what our participation in COS means and what is the result of that effort for the Layer5 community. There is an assistant, there is Homero. Homero is a member of the COS also, and he's now.
That's right. That's right, Senor Marin. We were already quite familiar with his love of Japanese cartoons. So good. Yeah, it's fantastic to have Homero here, as well as I'll say one last thing on Jesus's behalf, and that is that this is our second time so this is the second time that that COS has been held. And it's the second time that our community has been involved in teaching a workshop. And much to my much to my delight, Jesus and I got to meet at last year's workshop. It was delivered on Istio, and it was supposed to be how to contribute to Istio. And contributing to Istio is hard. Or, people are busy. They're not necessarily there to try to help grow others, and they want a community. It's just it's hard. It's hard to contribute to. And so anyway, Jesus hung around and has been active in the community since, and has been growing a community of open sourcers in Mexico. And so I'm really tickled that he's the one that's delivering the workshop this year, which is really cool. So I guess that means probably Homero, next year, Jesus will slide over to the right. He'll bump me out, and then you'll be sitting on the left. So we'll set that goal. Cool. We are.
That worked for me.
Anyone have? Thank you, Jesus. That was great. Anyone have anything else before we cut out? I'll say that Augustine and Jebitok, have you guys, and Nisarj, I don't know that any of the three of you individuals have necessarily been on this call before. I think we lost Augustine. But if the two of you haven't, please introduce. Please take the last minute to do that.
Yeah, hello. So I have not been on this call before. And yeah, I'm Nisarg, everyone. I'm from India. I'm a final year computer science student right now. And I'm quite interested in working with systems, cloud, etc. I've previously worked on some of such projects. And I'm really new to Meshery. I'm actually exploring the idea of service meshes, etc. But I find it pretty interesting. And this presentation was almost, I didn't understand much, to be very honest, but I saw that what you guys were trying to do. I tried to understand how you're trying to break it down, probably refactoring, etc. That was a discussion, what it was around. And I would like to contribute. Let's see what I can work on.
That's awesome. That's great. Welcome, Sash.
Thank you.
Actually, do you want to just briefly? There's a bit of your prior focus that has been centric to networking.
Yes. So I'm not sure how that would help me with these projects that you're working on, but I can still talk a little bit about that. So yeah, previously I had worked, like just this summer, I was working on a NetBSD organization on my GSOC project. It was regarding fuzzing of the networking stack protocols for NetBSD. It was mainly oriented towards the networking stack, as I said, and quality assurance of that. So my work was around, I would say, it was at the intersection of understanding how networking systems work, and that was one part. Another was working with quite a bit amount of kernel subsystems and some of the APIs that kernel exposed. So that sort of work I was working on. That was one. Other, I've also worked previously with Samsung Research on 5G related research domain. So my work was on the MAC layer of 5G, where I was supposed to work on optimizing some function of the MAC scheduler that they were working with. So that was also a pretty nice experience for me. And yeah, I'm generally really interested in networking. I almost like to look out for such work or projects. Even in my course projects, I have worked on a few. One of them was a Linux AQM scheduler, tweaking it a little bit for like improving it, so to say. So yeah, that has been my background in networking.
I'll explain to you why what you just said is quite relevant. And I put a little bit of that into the chat. But
okay.
The reason I'm not going to explain it now is because we're just over time.
No worries.
No. Yeah, and so that was great. Thank you. Jebitok, Sharon, are you able to introduce?
I'm Sharon. Hello, I'm Sharon Jebitok from Kenya. I am a JavaScript developer, but still new to open source and Meshery, but I'm looking for a way that I can contribute to the community. Thank you.
Welcome, Sharon. Very nice to have you. We're gonna chat you up in Slack here in a minute. Thanks for jumping on. Okay, well,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're out of time. Thanks a bunch, Miku. That was long overdue. So, okay, see everyone in a week. Talk to you soon,
See you. See you. Bye.
guys.
Bye bye. See
See you.
you. Thank you.